Right, so before you go on any weight loss protocol, diet, whatever program, it's really important you understand how your body burns fat. Because I think people have this misconception that they go on this diet, this is a fantastic diet, that just something magic seems to happen, right? That there's a specific food that if I eat this, it helps me lose weight, right? You have to understand the basic principles of thermodynamics. It's just physics, it's just how it works. And there's no difference between you as an energy system and any other energy system. None whatsoever. Once you get your head around this, and I mean really understand the principles of what's happening here from an energy balance point of view, it makes life a hell of a lot easier. So, I'm going to try and break this down in terms of something you can get your head around and relate to. First thing to think about is you have to understand what your energy balance is. The energy balance is the amount of food that you eat to the amount of energy that you expend. Food is energy. We measure the energy that's in food in what we call a calorie. It's the same as saying we measure the temperature of outside in Celsius or degrees. Same as we say we measure the distance we travel in miles and kilometers. Well, we measure the amount of energy that's in food, what we call a calorie. So all foods contain calories. Protein and carbohydrates contain 4 calories per gram. Fat contains 9 calories per gram. So fat is twice as calorific, or twice as dense as carbohydrates and proteins. But it's not quite that simple either. We'll get to that. So how much energy do we expend, and how does that work, and what does energy expenditure mean? Right, we categorize energy expenditure into 4 different slots, four buckets, 4 levels. So, say for example, I expend, again, just using these numbers to make it easy, 3,000 calories per day. So, I use 3,000 calories per day. If I eat 3,000 calories, my weight stays the same because that's energy balance or homeostasis. Energy balance is all we need to know. So, what is the 3,000 calories made up of from an energy expenditure point of view? How are they allocated in my body and the functions that I do? 65% roughly of those 3,000 calories are used just to keep me alive. So if I lie still in bed and I don't move, I'll use about 60 to 65% of that 3,000 just to keep me alive, just for cellular function, respiration, to keep my brain moving, to keep the nervous system functioning, keep everything just moving, skin repair, hair repair, cellular repair, organs, heart, liver, everything, heartbeat, all that kind of stuff. That's your metabolic rate. The metabolic rate will determine on how much muscle mass you've got, because muscle mass is full of cells. If I add more muscle, I add more cells. If I add more cells, I add the higher requirement for more energy. Your metabolic rate is the amount of energy that your body uses and requires just to stay alive. Does that make sense? Right. The next stage then, the next part of that then, is what we call NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Just think about it as moving. So your basic metabolic rate is just lying still, not moving. How much energy does it take just for cellular function to keep me alive? So if I lay, like, God forbid, in a coma, how many calories would it take? Of 3,000 calories, it would take 65%. All right, simple as that. So next is NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and that is moving my hands to eat, talking, moving, running up and down the stairs, going to the toilet, even moving my hands when I talk, even blinking. That's all part of NEAT, but it's not specific exercise. It's non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So it's not me going into the gym and say, right, I'm going to train for an hour, which is specific exercise. This is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So it's just stuff. If I didn't exercise, the energy that I expend during the day, it takes up about 10 to 15%. This is why your steps are so important. That's why people count steps, because that would account for the non-exercise part of your movement. Where if I'm just sitting all day doing nothing and don't have many steps counted up, that NEAT portion decreases. All right. What have we got then after that? So you get your basic metabolic rate, you get your NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, then you have the thermogenic effect of food. What does that mean? Thermogenic effect of food is we need to use energy to get energy. All right, so I have to digest the food that I eat in order to get the energy from it. That digestive process requires energy. Any function at all that my body does needs energy. So I expend energy to get the energy from the food. Now, things like protein are very high on that thermogenic threshold, about 30%. What does that mean? That means if I eat, say, 100 calories of protein, I'm only actually really absorbing 70 calories because it took 30 calories just to digest the protein. So my net intake is about 70. This is why we always recommend eating more protein. Makes you feel full up for longer, and also speeds up your digestive system and your metabolism, because digestion is a metabolic function. All right, it's part of what your body does to stay alive. So if I eat more protein, I speed up that metabolic rate. I can eat more food for less calories. For example, I can eat 100 calories but only absorb 70. And then there's other metabolic functions that come along with the protein: muscle repair, muscle building, all that kind of stuff. So they're a bit different. Carbohydrates and fat have a very low thermodynamic threshold. There's not much. They're very easy to digest. As soon as they go into the gut, they're sort of broken down and released into the bloodstream. So we want to eat more protein so we can get that thermogenic effect even higher. Right, what have we got then? Then we have exercise, specific exercise. Do I go to the gym for an hour every day, or do I go for a walk in the morning? That is my exercise time, and that accounts for probably about 10 or 5% of your total energy expenditure. So we've got 65% come from metabolic function. We have about 15% coming from non-exercise activity thermogenesis. We've got about 10 to 15% coming from the digesting of food if it's high in protein. Otherwise that number just decreases. And then we get exercise. So we want to maximize those numbers so we're burning more energy just staying alive and breathing. So again, if I then consume 3,000 calories, my body stays in balance. Now, if I consume more than 3,000 calories, if I eat more energy than my body requires, I have surplus energy. Now, that doesn't mean that the food's going to just disappear. That means from a survival point of view, from an evolutionary point of view, my body has found a really good way to store that energy, because usually food is scarce and I might need to use that energy to go and find more food. So I will store it in what's called adipose tissue, which is fat cells. So your fat cells are just stored energy. If you're eating a surplus, you have to store it, to use it to help you go and find food later. Unfortunately, in these modern times, we don't use it. We just keep topping up and topping up and topping up. So let's change this now and do a different model for you to get your head around this energy expenditure point of view. Right, I want you to imagine a car. My car travels 3,000 miles every day. That's going to equate to my energy expenditure of 3,000 calories. So the car travels 3,000 miles a day. All right, let's say 300. Cut the numbers down. 300 miles every day. All right. Now, if I put in 300 miles worth of fuel at the end of the day, I have no extra over and I'm not under. I have energy balance, homeostasis with the environment, with the car. So the car just balances. Now, it doesn't matter if I put in 300 miles worth of fuel in one petrol station, or if I put it in over 5 or 6 different petrol stations throughout the journey. As long as I put in 300 miles worth of fuel, the car will travel 300 miles. Now, let's say I put in 310 miles of fuel for a journey that still only takes 300. At the end of the day, there's 10 miles worth of fuel left over. Now, the way the body works is the body won't keep this in the petrol tank. It'll remove it and it'll store it so it can get it later, if needed, in a reserve tank. So imagine your car's towing a wee reserve tank, and any surplus energy at the end of the day will be then stored in that reserve tank in case I need it in a case of an emergency, or the car runs out of fuel, or I have to go somewhere different, I've got to travel further. I can tap into this reserve tank. That's what your body fat is. So let's say for a good few months I'm putting in 110 or 310, 320, 315, 310, 350 miles worth of fuel for a car that only ever goes 300 miles every day. Your car goes the same distance every day. All that surplus energy, that extra energy, is filling up this reserve tank. Before I know it, this reserve tank is massive. Your belly fat, stored, reserved energy. Now, remember, fat, all that stored energy, is now compressed into fat cells. So all the excess carbohydrates, all the excess protein, all the excess fat gets broken down and stored as adipose tissue as fat, because remember, it's getting 9 calories per gram. That means it's easier to store a lot of it, a lot of energy, in a small place. It's an evolutionary trait that the body designed over hundreds of thousands of years, trying to stay alive. Right, 1 pound of body fat, now if I took a pound of fat, it has 3,500 calories. That's everybody. Yours is no different. It's not magic. It's got 3,500 calories for every pound of fat that I store in my body. Remember, this is just excess fuel in the reserve tank. Right, now what are we going to do? I now want to tap on that reserve tank. My reserve tank's getting too big. I want to tap into that. I want to try and make that come down a wee bit. How do I do that? I have to create a caloric deficit, or a calorie deficit, or an energy deficit. How do we do that? Right, the car's still traveling 300 miles every day. I'm going to put in 250 miles worth of fuel for a journey that takes 300 miles. Now, you're going to say, but you're only putting in 250, the car goes 300. What about the 50 that's left over? That's your deficit. Now, it doesn't mean that that deficit just disappears. If the car doesn't travel the 300 mile, the car still goes the 300 mile. But in this scenario, in the same with your body, the car will tap into the reserve tank to make up the difference on the extra 50 mile. So it'll travel 250 mile on the petrol tank. It'll then tap into the reserve tank to take up the extra 50 mile. That's a calorie deficit. That's it. That's how everybody burns fat. That's how we store fat. That's how we burn fat. So if you go on some sort of specific diet and somebody says to you, this is the best diet ever because you're eating this and you're eating that, no. It burnt fat because it took you into a caloric deficit. That's it. Not because of the type of food that you ate, not because of the way that you ate it, not because of the timing you did it, right? Not because there was a superfood or a magic powder or the angels one day woke up and looked over you and went, oh, today you're going to lose weight. No, it's because you had a caloric deficit. Now, there's a few caveats to this. If we go deep into a caloric deficit for too long, there's not enough fuel in the tank to actually run the car. The car starts to slow down and goes, you know what, you're only giving me 100 miles worth of fuel here. I'm going to start shortening the journey because this is not good for us. I'm breaking down the engine. Right? This isn't working. So we need to make sure we create a small calorie deficit. Now what we can do is, right, I'm going to put in 250 miles worth of fuel for a journey that takes 300, but I'm going to exercise in the gym. That means I'm now going to travel 320 miles instead of 300. Still put in 250. I've now created a 50 caloric deficit from the energy, put in less energy, but I've also expended an extra 200 out of the reserve tank by driving the car further. Does that make sense? So this is why you need a caloric restriction and calorie expenditure to drive that car further, to tap into that reserve tank even more. Now, what are we doing when we're fasting? Why is fasting so good? You're just not putting any petrol in the tank, right? You're just putting in just enough to get the engine ticking over in the morning and driving. Once you start driving, we're going straight on the reserve tank. So this is why I keep telling you, when you're fasting, if you feel hungry, you're not hungry as long as there's body fat in your body, because hunger would say there's not enough energy to drive the car. But you have a reserve tank full of energy. It's teaching your brain and teaching your body how to tap into it, or realizing that you are tapping into it. Now, the process of getting the petrol from the reserve tank to the car requires a wee bit of energy, because there's a wee pump has to switch on. So whenever the petrol tank, the main petrol tank, goes down and starts to hit empty, and the wee warning light comes on, empty, empty, empty. That's your ghrelin, your hunger hormone, saying, oh shit, the petrol tank's empty. If you can push through that, this wee pump kicks in and starts siphoning the petrol out of the reserve tank, and then this just keeps flowing. This is what happens when people say, I outpassed my hunger. The wee ghrelin, the wee warning light came on, petrol tank's low, hunger, hunger, hunger. The wee pump light starts to kick in after a wee while, about 20-30 minutes. We start siphoning energy up. Hunger's now gone away because fuel line has now taken from the reserve tank. Does that make sense? And that's how you burn fat or stored energy. There's nothing brilliant. But like I said, the key to fasting here is we're driving the car for about 250 miles purely on the reserve tank. Right, now again, we can only do this for a short period of time at this extremity before the car just goes, I'm not going to drive any further because this is too difficult. I'm breaking down the engine too far, it's too hard, and I'm going to actually, the main reason why it does it, it goes, do you know what, you're tapping into the reserve tank here big time. Now let's say we really run out of fuel, we're not going to get any, so I'm going to slow you down. I'm only going to let you drive 200 because it means that there's always a wee bit in the reserve tank just in case of emergencies. If you keep that going, it'll say, right, I'm only going to let you drive 150 because I need to keep a wee backup in the reserve tank. It'll never let your reserve tank go empty because that's death. Right? That means there's no energy at all, not even for cellular function. So it's always going to want to keep some sort of backup. This is why we call it metabolic adaptation, where your metabolism will start to slow down, slow down, slow down to match the amount of fuel that's coming in. All right, but we don't want that to happen. That's why we fast for 5 days, and then we go back to maintenance phase. So I'm going to drive the hell out of this car. I'm going to put my foot pedal to the metal. I'm not just going to make sure I'm constantly tapping on the reserve tank, because I'm not going to stop at any petrol stations, but I'm also going to drive the car as far as I can, and actually going to get an extra 50 miles out of it every day. So I'm really tapping on that reserve tank, and then I'm going to stop. Boom. I'm going to refuel. I'm going to let my body relax. I'm not going to go on the surplus where I'm going to make the reserve tank bigger again. I'm just going to drive on the petrol stations for about 3 weeks. After 3 weeks, everything's good. The tyres are refreshed. The engine's feeling great. I'm going to tap on the reserve tank again, take another dump out of it, but I'm not going to put any back in. That's maintenance calories. That's my 3,000. I'm not going to go above 3,000. 3,000 calories is a lot of calories, right? Because that is actually my maintenance. And that's how your body burns fat. There's nothing magic about it, guys. There's nothing magic about fat burning or any specific diet, or this diet was better than that diet. It's whatever diet allows you to create and maintain a caloric deficit long enough to get to your goal. Like we says, we're doing 5 days hardcore, so we don't have to diet for a month. So we're going to burn the same energy that we would burn in a month in 5 days, but by bang, really hitting us hard, and then relaxing for 3 weeks. I don't know anybody that can't really do that. All right. So if we're maximizing time and energy and enjoyability, because when we go back to eating maintenance calories, you get to eat the amount of food that you enjoy. You're not feeling that starvation or deprivation. If one of your friends comes and says you're only going for a cup of tea and a sandwich, no problem, because I've got loads of calories because I'm on my maintenance phase. You know, there's a wedding come up, someone wants to go out for a restaurant, no problem. I've got loads of extra calories because I'm on my maintenance phase. At the end of the month, I'm going hardcore again, bang. So every month we're dropping about half a stone, half a stone, half a stone, half a stone. You do that for a year, guess how much weight you've lost? Easy peasy. And that's how you burn fat.